A second way to connect business in society that's emerged has been called corporate social responsibility, or corporate social responsiveness, or sometimes just CSR. Well, there's some question about how far back CSR goes. Most people who think about this date the origin to, in the U.S. at least, to Howard Bowen in 1953 in a book that he wrote. And he says, you know, the business person produces two categories of products. The first consists of commercial goods and services. The second is the conditions under which these goods and services are produced. And Bowen saw these conditions as social products of a business. And he's making the distinction between the economic products, the goods and services, and the social products, the conditions under which these products are made. And this gives really rise to the origins of CSR in the American context. In the 1960s and 70s, again in the U.S., people began to take this idea very seriously. Large firms especially began to make what became known as the business case for social responsibility. And the business case went something like this. Look, being a good citizen, paying attention to the social effects of your business, you can gain important support from customers and communities. You can avoid regulation, or at least hope to constrain the regulation. And look, CSR is just good business. Now, this emerges in the U.S. at a time when you're saying, well, there's the business part, there's the ethics part, business and ethics are separate. In other societies around the world, this separation of business and ethics didn't go as far. For instance, in the Scandinavian countries, in Denmark and Sweden and Norway, there was never the big separation between business and the rest of society. And we'll talk about that later. By focusing on the business case, however, business leaders could counter Milton Friedman's argument that CSR was a waste of shareholder resources and a usurping of shareholders' prerogative and government's prerogative. Now, most of the work on CSR was done by issue or by social issue. A company would take on an issue like racial discrimination or pollution or consumerism and try to do better with respect to its products and services, not just through its philanthropic contribution, though that was sometimes added on. Many companies have fought these ideas all the way since they were committed to the dominant story about, look, this is a waste of money, it's only about money and profits. People began to talk about not just social responsibility, but corporate social performance and the connection between social performance and financial performance. For instance, is good social performance simply a matter of being financially well off enough so that you can afford it? Or does good social performance lead to good financial performance? These questions have spawned hundreds of research projects, and today I think it's fair to say that they remain open questions. I'm going to argue a little bit later they're open questions because the way we ask the question, but I'll save that for now. Many people have argued that CSR, if it's to have an impact, has to be institutionalized through a set of principles. This really came about in the 1960s with something called the Sullivan Principles, articulated by Reverend Leon Sullivan, who was a board member of General Motors, around the issue of should companies do business in South Africa under apartheid. Well, this idea of articulating a set of principles has really grown over the years. For instance, now there's a set of principles called the UN Global Compact that the United Nations asked companies to sign. And these are principles in 4 areas, all of which make some sense. First of all, in human rights. Businesses should figure out where they're not, or at least they should make sure they're not complicit in human rights violations. Around labor, businesses should work on the elimination of all forms of forced labor or child labor. Around the environment, businesses should promote greater environmental responsibility and around anti-corruption. Business should work against corruption, extortion, and bribery. And these principles make sense. Notice that they question the idea in the old story that business and society are separate. Business and ethics are separate. And there's some great examples of CSR programs. I'm going to give you a couple, but there are lots of others. And again, when I give you an example and I use a company name, don't assume everything that company does is either always right or always wrong. Oscar Wilde once said, the problem with thinking about saints and sinners is that every saint has a past and every sinner has a future. And we shouldn't expect more of companies than we expect of ourselves. I'll give an example of a CSR program, SAP, the computer company. In Latin America, SAP helps girls gain the life skills they need to craft their own futures. In Europe, they help young entrepreneurs build what's called social businesses that we'll talk about later in the course. In Asia, it provides computer access to help people compete for jobs. And in Africa, they focus on helping children attend school. Or think about Procter & Gamble and their program they call Learn, Live, and Thrive. It's improved the lives for over 400 million children. They have a vaccination program associated with young babies and their Pampers product. They have a partnership in China with P&G Hope Schools in very rural, poverty-stricken areas. And they've supported programs like Feeding America, oriented towards children's basic needs, contributing more than 3.2 million pounds of products. This second new model, in addition to philanthropy, is that business is connected with society by its corporate social responsibilities activities, and maybe by its corporate social responsibility and its philanthropic activities. And that's a very different idea about business connection with society than the dominant story. What I'd like you to think about in the discussion forum and talk about is this question of, does good social performance lead to good financial performance? Or does good financial performance allow companies to have good social performance? What do you think about this?